Hey, how's it going?
It's good. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Well, I'm Henry. Thank you so much for taking the time. It's great to talk to you.
Pleasure. Yeah.
And firstly, my wife and co-host Elle, she really wanted to join, but she hasn't been feeling too well, so
Oh,
she
I'm so sorry.
yeah, it's but maybe next time. But she wanted to pass on her appreciation for your music, and so, but
Oh,
yeah,
that's wonderful. Thank you.
yeah. Well, how's life first of all? What you been up to? Have you been busy? Have you had a time off? What's been going on?
A little bit of time off. I'm doing a video game for Warner Brothers, which is exciting. Working on that, and um, I'm doing some orchestration actually on a very cool TV project that I can't really discuss, but it's pretty cool. So it's kind of what I'm working on at the moment.
Awesome. Well, I guess, I mean, the thing I like to ask everybody is how did you get into composing? Was that something that you had wanted to do since you were young, or is that something that you kind of stumbled into? Like, how did you come across it all?
Yeah, I started out learning piano and found that um, while I loved a lot of the pieces I was learning, I was also kind of interested in some of the pop music of the time, and that sort of led me to kind of playing around and sort of creating stuff. Like one of the tracks in particular was like "Live and Let Die." I love that song,
Hmm.
Paul McCartney song. So I was kind of like, yes, I really want to write music and maybe write songs too. So that kind of started me off. But I did have composition lessons since I was really really young, and I gravitated, I think, mostly towards film music. It seemed to be the most interesting thing that I could do.
Well, what were some of, if not one, if or many of the projects that you first felt like, okay, I'm kind of maybe in the business now, so to speak, or like I feel a little bit more established? Like, what were some of the first ones that you got to be a part of that you actually really got to make your own music for?
Um, so I began really as an orchestrator for Tyler Bates, and I was very fortunate to kind of start almost at the top of the industry. It's very unusual, but the literally the first film I orchestrated was Slither, which is a James
Mm.
Gunn film, and then the second film that I orchestrated was 300 and got to conduct that. And of course, that was a huge film. But with 300, I got to do a little bit of writing on it. And um, with Watchmen and Sucker Punch, I got to do more and more of the kind of additional music. So it was really like a great way to come into the industry because it was not like, oh, you're responsible for an entire film. I got to do a couple of cues on these films, and that gave me an understanding of the process of how to write music for film and how to create tone and how to tell a story, but without the full pressure of having to score the entire film and the full. It's very hard when so much of being a composer is liaising with directors, liaising with producers, having discussions about what the music should sound like, being able to make adjustments if there's some notes on the music that you're providing. So all of that stuff takes a bit of time to learn. So kind of starting out as I did as an orchestrator who wrote some additional music was a really great way to come into the industry. But I was very fortunate. I mean, literally the first four films I did were all working on massive blockbusters. So and weirdly, I when I began to do more composition and write film scores, I sort of took a big step back in terms of doing smaller budget indies. And that was kind of how I began to grow my independent kind of composition career. Um, but obviously, I still work very closely with Tyler Bates and on Pearl. That was a great opportunity to collaborate as a full composer on that, and other projects as well that I've done with him. But yeah, no, the last I'd say 4 or 5 years, I've had so many films where I've been able to kind of be the lead composer, and all that training, almost like 10, 15 years of training was really helpful because there's a lot of technical things you need to learn about. scoring films apart from just writing music. There's a lot of technical stuff and um, doing additional music. Starting out that way was a great way to get into the industry.
Yeah, I mean, and I mean, just for one, I love Zack Snyder and I love James Gunn, and I feel like the music. I mean, all those movies you mentioned, I love, and I love the music. So that's I can imagine that was a pretty daunting but pretty awesome thing to be able to do, like you were saying.
Yeah, same with the Guardians. By the time we got to the Guardians films, I was writing a large chunk of it, and even in the orchestration of it, because I fully orchestrated and conducted those films too, you know, was very involved in coloring the film and really sort of creating that sound in the first two Guardians films as well. So it was a pretty good kind of sandpit to be playing in.
Yeah. Well, I do want to get into a couple of the really recent ones like Mary, but I did want to ask you about Pearl as you're just talking about. And my wife, for one, is truly obsessed with that movie. And I think that that trilogy is one of the most unique, and Pearl specifically is one of the most original movies probably that I've ever seen. Like it's such a, it came out of nowhere and it didn't need to exist necessarily, but the fact that it does in that way is so interesting. And the music, I think I mean, the whole movie, but the music really does feel like it is very traditional. Like it almost is like Wizard of Oz or something in that way, very orchestral and what was the process of you, because you did work with Tyler Bates on that as well. What was the process of you either working with him, working with the director on finding the sound? Because maybe it was easy to do or maybe it was hard to do. I feel like that project is so, you kind of have to find the right tone to get it right.
Yeah, I mean, Pearl was one of those dream projects where, and it happened right in the middle of COVID. It was filmed in COVID. That's why it was created. Was they were flying out to do X to New Zealand, and Ty West sort of had this idea of why don't we do, they spent so much time creating the character of Pearl, which is also played by Mia Goth as well as Maxine. He thought, why don't we've done all this research on creating a backstory and we're out there, why don't we just film the backstory? And they got the green light pretty much as they landed in New Zealand. So and everything with COVID was, there was no rush to get back to LA. When I got the film, the schedule was pretty quick because X was coming out and they wanted to announce Pearl kind of right on the tail end of the film as kind of a teaser for it. And because of COVID, everything was pretty locked down in LA. So a lot of it was just me in a room with the film, kind of in a darkened room with the film. So it was, it was one of those periods of times where I really didn't have a lot of interaction with people. It was very much an isolated task. And it was a bit of a dream job in that the request for the score was to sort of feel like that golden age of Hollywood. The idea was it's basically an Alfred Hitchcock film. So you're looking at people like Bernard Herrmann and Max Steiner, and it's all the stuff that you learn in film school, but no one ever wants. There's not very a direct. No, most directors don't want. It's a very specific style, and most directors would never ask for that. So this was a kind of an unusual ask, but it's that kind of thing that you dream of being able to do: create a theme and blow it out and write in that style that is that kind of golden age of Hollywood. So it was very specific in terms of what the goal was with the score.
Was there
And
was there a lot of like trial and error, or was it kind
no,
of right off?
I mean I pretty much wrote the main title and sent that in and said, "What do you think about this?" The opening, and that became the theme of the movie. And yeah, the response was, "Yeah, this is exactly it. Just keep going." So um, so that was kind of, and then the obviously the reference to the Wee Wee Marie, which is used in the Scarecrow sequence. That was something that Tyler had done, and it's an old song. Tyler had done an arrangement of it for X, and so the challenge on that was to sort of you do it as an Easter egg, so it's incorporated into each film. There's a version of it in each film that you hear in different in different ways. Um, so you know, Mia Goth's performance in Pearl is so compelling. It's such an out of the box story that it just seemed to lend itself, and it just seemed to eat up that whole kind of sound. And that was the goal, was to create something unique, create something that hadn't been done before, and really just sort of have fun with it.
Yeah.
It was precisely that. It wasn't a long scoring process. I think it was 2 months. It was pretty quick to write it. Um, so we were against the clock, and then obviously producing it was tricky during COVID, just because recording with live musicians was really tricky.
Yeah.
Everyone had to be masked up, and you know everyone had to be a certain number of feet apart. So then that limited the number of musicians you could have in the room at a time. It was a very, very difficult time for recording scores, but the film was a lot of fun. It turned out well, and it holds a special place in my heart for um, I sometimes, when I think, when you have that opportunity to really focus on one project and kind of do that stream of consciousness writing, it's difficult to replicate on other projects, because the usual process for film scoring is very different than that.
Yeah.
You know,
How about something like quite recent, like Mary, which is this, iconic religious story? Was that, and that was done for Netflix, was that because it is such a familiar, legendary story? Was that intimidating, or did it just feel like another project? Hey, it's a character, it's a story, I'm gonna tackle it, or did any of the surrounding elements, let's call it, did that feed into your process, or was that just out of your head?
it was definitely intimidating. I definitely felt like I desperately didn't want to screw it up. And to make matters worse, the timeline on that, I think, is probably the most aggressive timeline I've ever been given. I had 20 days to turn the score around,
Oof.
and it's 93 minutes. Um, and it was one of those films, because last year I had you know, some really great films that came out. I had Your Monster, which was this really fun rom-com that won the Audience Award at Sundance, and then went on to, I think, get up to like number 4 on HBO Max or something like that. But it's a really fun film.
Yeah.
Another film I scored, which is really being released in August, is a film called Mistura. So I had sort of this run of films, and then the other film that I was working on is the Locked film, which comes out March 21st, which is Bill Skarsgård and Anthony Hopkins. And the premise is that Bill Skarsgård gets locked, trapped in this, trying to steal this car, Anthony Hopkins' car, gets locked and trapped in it, and finds out that this is a trap, and that
Hmm.
Hopkins is kind of returning to a little bit to his Hannibal Lecter days.
Interesting.
Um, it's a really intense thriller. Bill Skarsgård's amazing in it, but so that was like a 3 or 4 month process of scoring that. It's a Sam Raimi film, so it's pretty cool. Dave Yarvo, who directed Brightburn, invited me to score it. So it was like I literally had these back to back films, and sort of felt like the year was done, and then suddenly, Mary dropped in my lap, and they're like, "We want to release this December 6th," and this was September the 1st. So I was like, and they said, "We've got to have the score is dubbing September the 23rd, because we've got to have time to do all the what they call subs and dubs, subtitles, and they translate it into every language you can imagine, so it can go globally." Well, I said, "Well, that leaves me 20 days to score and produce this movie." And I was like, "That's a daunting process." Like, I found Pearl tough with 2 months to turn that around. Mary was literally 12 days of writing, 12 days of producing.
Hmm.
So I pretty much sat here in this chair at 4 a.m., would start my day. I'd go through to maybe 11 o'clock at night, grab a
Wow.
couple of sleep. And I did that for 2 weeks, with the director sitting on the couch behind me. And again, had to sort of write that as a stream of consciousness. but again, I wrote the theme first for it, which the director really liked, and I played it for the supervising sound editor as well, and sort of turned around. They had tears in their eyes. So I was like, okay, I guess I guess the main theme is working. And you know, I I want with Mary, I wanted it to feel like not a typical type of biblical score. I wanted to try to avoid orchestra as much as possible, and keep it much more with unusual instruments. And my sort of idea was this idea of the ancient and the new, modern. And so I use these old Roman instruments. There's a guy in Spain who plays them, like the carynx is this big Roman horn, and the shofar, and um, goat horns, and these kind of interesting flutes. I had, and then for the new, I had like synths, and also this phenomenal violinist who plays this electric violin, but we run it through all the guitar pedals. So it sort of acts like an electric guitar violin. It's very, very cool. And she used a looping station. So some of that really kind of interesting, dreamy sound that starts coming in is this electric violin. And then same with the percussion. We used a lot of ancient percussion and modern percussion. And the big find, which I'm very grateful to Instagram for, is I stumbled across Julie Elvin. She's very well known as a vocalist for video games, but she'd never really done any film before. But I felt like there was something really interesting about her voice. It's got this very breathy, kind of edgy quality to it. And so I wrote the theme with her voice in mind, and then had her sort of do vocals kind of throughout the film, as well as two other vocalists who had more of that Middle Eastern sound. And then, yeah, the Dukes, things like that. Yeah, and then just some odd instruments, odd stringed instruments, some lyre, and some older, more ancient stringed instruments. So that was sort of the concept, and then sort of tucking real strings behind that. So it was ambitious for a 20-day score, but
Yeah.
I think it turned out pretty well.
Yeah.
So,
Is when it, because I know everybody's different, is when you're approaching something like Mary or Brightburn, which is another great movie, is it typically the kind of genre that feeds into the tone? Is it a character, the central character, like a Pearl kind of character that makes you think about, all right, what this should be, or is it the world itself, or does it change every single time? Like, what's typically your focus with that first leap into the music?
it's a great question. I think it changes for every film. For me, it's always about trying to find, what is the heart, the essence of the film. So, for example, with Guardians of the Galaxy, we wanted a melody that was sort of heroic, and the term that was used was sort of space opera. This is a space opera, so we wanted something that had that kind of action adventure feel to it. With Get Out, the main melody was actually on a harp, and it was this idea of hypnosis, of being hypnotized with the teacup.
Right.
And so the melody sort of came out of that, as well as the use of like these ancient voices that permeate the score, kind of the cries of these voices. With Pearl, the key in there was her character, but it was her yearning to be a star. It was like her fantasy was kind of the in for that. So that Brightburn, the in was the idea of this boy potentially being a superhero. So I created a sort of a 3-note theme for that could have been very positive, but I end up sort of darkening it. It becomes more kind of darker and demonic as the score goes on, and it gets sort of into the low brass as he sort of takes the wrong path in his life. So that was sort of the in for that. The in for Locked was quite different. The score for Locked, I'm really excited. That's going to be released March 21st. It's unlike any score. I worked with the drummer from Marilyn Manson,
Oh
and
wow.
he's a really great percussionist drummer. And the idea was to create the challenge that Dave gave me with this was, can we do a score with just percussion? And I was like, I'll try. It's a bit tricky, but so we used like I used a sort of mallet. This kind of the idea was being trapped, and the idea of this time moving. So, and this idea of sort of claustrophobia and time passing. So that to do that, we use this kind of mallet on this low piano, just sort of hitting gong, gong, gong. And Gil, the drummer, found this. It's sort of like a huge. I mean, it's a cowbell, but it's huge. I mean, it's like 8 feet long and it's deep. And so he sort of matched that piano kind of with a low gong, gong, and it was almost like the sound of like water torture, of like just
Mm,
a drip on your head the whole time and being worn down. And then from that, we sort of built other kind of percussive elements. Um, but the in for that was literally being trapped, locked in a car, and like almost like rain on the roof, just tapping through the whole thing. And then as things, as the story gets, as the action revs up, you begin to do faster kind of toms and other really cool instruments. Um, it's always, that's the hardest part of any scoring any film, is finding what's the in to the story, like what's the heart of the film and how do you express that musically. um and that's always the challenge, and I think that's often what you have the longest discussion about, because you want something that represents what that film is, and that could be a character in the film, it could be, you know the location, it could be, their dream, their aspiration. uh
yeah.
so yeah, but that's the hard, once you have that, then for me the scoring process is pretty easy. For Mary, it was this idea, the main theme for Mary, I think, was this idea, this mix of joy and sorrow, because for her character is really interesting. She's having a child is this most joyous thing, but she knows ultimately her child is going to be brutally killed. And so I think sort of trying to create a melody that, and again, I wanted it to feel, like it had a touch of sort of like a traditional Jewish feel, but I wanted it to feel like sorrowful, but like still that there was hope in it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So I was trying to find that. That was the in for me on that. And again, I wanted to avoid any lyric or word on it. I just wanted it to feel more like, and so the theme comes in various places. You hear it, you know, very poignantly, and in some and sort of more joyously in other places in the relationships, and but in some places we just I wanted it just to feel like that pure agony of the pain and despair that she goes through and that the family goes through. So it's trying to find things that can, themes or ideas that can be manipulated to fit various emotional states.
Hmm. And well, one other recent project that is really interesting is Agent Elvis.
Oh, yeah.
That's something when I saw that appear on Netflix, I just thought like that is the most like random
Yes.
thing, but so clever and
Yeah.
creative. I never
Yeah.
in a million years would have thought of that or
Yeah.
thought that was a thing, but the score for that is I think very unlike some of the other stuff or at least the stuff that we've been talking about. Like it's kind of jazz clubby, but then
Yes.
there's also Elvis-esque vibes. And so similar to the other projects, like what was it hard? Because you obviously want to have a little reminiscence of the actual Elvis, but you don't want to have it be like this is just, a direct copy. You just want to have kind of, I guess, as you said, like the heart of the the character.
Yeah, and so the concept for that, for those who haven't seen it's, I think it's well worth a watch. It's on
Hmm.
Netflix. Agent Elvis is the name of it, and the premise is it's an adult animated series where the premise is, what if Elvis were a secret agent?
Hmm.
He always wanted to be a secret agent. I had a great chat with Priscilla about it, and she was like, "Yeah, Elvis always wanted to be a secret agent. He obviously went to the White House to meet Nixon, and there was something really very special, I think, about that whole period of time musically in the '60s. You had Vietnam, you had so many kind of absolutely iconic bands and iconic music and iconic locations, and so again, the in for that was creating something that felt slightly James Bond-esque, but it's Elvis's tune. So that was kind of the fun riff there, was kind of trying to bridge that between Elvis and James Bond. And there's places in the score where you can hear it really sort of tipping into that John Barry-esque Bond feel. And then there's other places where it's kind of full on rock and roll and even surfer in some places. And um, we just had fun because every episode had a different focus and a different style. So we were able to pull a lot of that kind of '60s jazz vibe, a lot of that kind of '60s spy. I mean, these are all sort of areas of music that I love. So for me, this was a really, really fun project. And it was spaced out, I think, over the course of about a year because the episodes came, because they're animated, they came just fairly slowly over that time. So we had quite a bit of time to dig into the music and, create a fairly wide array of colors. But that was fun, and again we got to work with great musicians on that. Gil was our drummer, and obviously Tyler's an amazing guitarist and bassist, so he did that, and I'm more the keyboard side of it. So I had like a B3 and a Rhodes and that kind of stuff. So we yeah, we had it was a sort of a precursor to the Maxine vibe,
Mm.
you know, um, with guitars and keyboards. Um, but that was fun, and that literally happened right after Pearl. So it was a great project to jump onto. But I found the premise really fun. A lot of people, I think, were felt it was a bit blasphemous towards Elvis. So it got mixed reviews. But on the whole, I think it's pretty funny. The cast is amazing. It's all SNL. Elizabeth Olsen plays one of his main kind of person opposite him. The monkey is actually played by the same actor who plays
Oh,
SpongeBob SquarePants. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So he vocalizes this really filthy monkey. So I think it was pretty funny. I met him at the opening night and didn't realize he was also SpongeBob SquarePants. But I mean, the cast is that all the guest stars who come in are amazing, and obviously Elvis is voiced by Matthew McConaughey.
Mm.
So the casting was amazing. Priscilla plays Priscilla in it, and I thought it was really really funny. It's sort of it's hard to describe. It's sort of like The Office meets I don't know, a weird animated series, but
Yeah.
it's out there.
Well, in with something like that, because it's animated, are you seeing the finished product, or
No,
you aren't? So are they giving you sketches, or are you saying this is what's happening in this episode? Go with it.
no, no. It's pretty specific line drawings, but it's not fully rendered like
Hmm.
what we saw. When it was finally came out, I was like, "Oh, that looks fantastic!" Or we got much more detail on it. Or even mid-process, we might be halfway through scoring an episode, and they'll be sending us updates that are more filled in and more colored. But um, it was a mix. We'd get cruder drawings with arrows pointing to where they would move, and but the timing was all locked, so you could do hit points, and there
Hmm.
were clear about where certain things would land.
And is that the same thing for, it looks like we have about 10 minutes before Zoom cuts us off, but is that the same thing for like a big movie like Guardians where there's a lot of effects? Are you
Yeah,
like, is that, you might see an unfinished product basically, or?
yeah. I mean, you do have to use a lot of imagination. For things like, for Crawl, for example, the alligators are all done with, people in green costumes and a weird kind of like
Mm,
puppet on their hands as. And with Guardians, we actually had um, James's brother was originally sort of was the stand-in for Rocket, Sean, and so you'd often see him crouching down, so that they would have an eye line
mm,
to the character, but he would always be sort of crouching down, being Rocket, and um, you're sort of scoring to that, so you kind of see it warts and all.
yeah.
Sometimes there might be sketches. What's most usual is you'll actually see like a written description, ship enters, ship fires, explosion, ship leaves. You'll see that flash up, so you know what the timing is, but you won't actually see the ship. You have to sort of score as though the ship's there. So that's not uncommon for most projects. You see
Yeah.
the VFX is always late to the table.
Yeah. Well, since we just have a couple of minutes left, I know you've already talked about some upcoming things. Is there anything else about those projects? Anything else that uh to keep an eye out for? And because I mean, all those projects that you talked about sound really really interesting.
Yeah, so the big one is Locked. Is They're doing a theatrical only release, which these days is pretty amazing. Most of the stuff now just goes straight to streaming. So if you want one of those kind of really fun popcorn movies to go and I don't know if it's a date night, but um, it's definitely going to be a fun film. Bill Skarsgård's amazing in it. He plays a
Yeah.
complete moron and is the victim of Hopkins's trap. So you can go enjoy it. That's March 21st. Nationwide. I think it's also going to be Canada, UK, France, Australia. So definitely worth checking out. And if you haven't been to the movies in a while in a movie theater, it's a fun experience just to go and grab some popcorn and watch a really good thriller.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's kind of what I'm most excited about right now is 3 weeks that opens. So
Yeah. Well, great. Well, Timothy, thank you so much again for taking the time. I would love to have you back on again sometime soon. But as I said before, my both my wife and I, we love the projects you've been a part of with your music being a really essential part. So, we are both big fans. So thank you very much for being here.
oh, thank you so much for having me on. Great pleasure to meet you.
All right, well, take care. We'll see you next time, okay?
All right.